Go to the agenda slide and we'll take a look at what we're going to address today. So our agenda for this part one is to address color fundamentals. We're just going to have a fun review of what color is all about scientifically. And then terms and definitions will go under that umbrella as well. And we're going to take a look at the 5 C's of color control. And when we talk about the 5 C's, this is where we're going to break this series down into a couple different parts. The first part is going to address the very first C in that list, and then the 5th C. So we are going to address capturing data, because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we're going to start there, which is a logical place to begin. And then we are going to enable you to try it yourself. So we will show you how you capture data in your environment from your all the variables in the print ecosystem, and then we'll enable you the opportunity to actually do it yourself. So sound good? Any questions, feedback, comments before I turn it over to the presenter today? All right, then Dave, it's all yours. Take it away.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Katie, for kicking that off.
One thing I do want to say, Dave, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I forgot to say, if you noticed, we did turn the recording on. This will be recorded. It is being recorded, and it will be posted on our events page on the ChromaChecker.com website.
Thanks, Katie. So we're going to do a very brief overview of how we as humans quantify color. And it's all about how our eyes see color. And if we look at the electromagnetic spectrum, there's one small piece which represents visible light. And the color that our eyes see are between 400 nanometers and 700 nanometers. And we all learned this in kindergarten when we learned the colors of the rainbow in the right order. Roy G. Biv, which is your red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And so in this way, we can quantify colors as long as we have light, because if we have no light, we have no color. So we've got to have light. And light is a very underappreciated aspect of color interpretation, because depending upon the color of the light, you will be influenced by the value that you see. So the color of the light or the illuminant will greatly affect the perception of the colors that you interpret. So based on that, ideally, we should be using spectral definitions for colors. This gives us the most information about the colors. And if you can imagine, when we have spectral information about a color, 32 numbers make up that definition. And it's easily converted to something called CLAB. I know a lot of people know CLAB, they like CLAB. CLAB just uses 3 colors. There are 3 numbers to represent the color. So the spectral data is more of the fingerprint of the color, and it can allow us to interpret what's going to happen to the color under different lighting conditions. So if I'm dealing with a product package, I can know what effect cool white fluorescent light is going to have on this package versus an LED type light source. And this, when you're creating designs and working with brand colors where color is important, the light becomes really critical to manage and understand. So when we look at CLAB, one color is represented by 3 numbers, lightness, and then basically a hue and a saturation value. And you can go from spectral to CLAB, but you can't go CLAB back to spectral. So CLAB's a bit limited in that it's only good for one illuminant. And it does represent the gamut of what a human eye is capable of seeing. So in this way, any color that we see can be mapped into the C-Lab color space, and we can identify colors this way, but again, only for one illuminant. If you want color that is illuminant independent or light source independent, you'll want to use spectral data to do this. And more and more spectral data is the way of the future. Now, when we define the printing gamut and measure color with that printing gamut, I like to use the example of a Grackle gamut. Grackle is the North American standard for printing on a coated paper stock. And we can represent the Grackle print gamut in a three-dimensional graphic, like I'm showing on the screen. That shaded outline is the range of color that a print, when printed on coated paper, is capable of attaining. And then each of those dots that you see there are Pantone values, 1800 Pantone values in the same C-Lab color space. So you can see some of those dots are inside the Grackle gamut and some are outside the Grackle gamut. And in fact, 58% of those Pantone colors are within 2 delta E of the Grackle gamut. And we'll talk about delta E more at the next session, but essentially it's a way to quantify color difference. And 2 is perceivable, but in most cases acceptable. It's a very small level of color difference. But you can still see that 42% of the colors are more than 2 delta E out of gamut of Grackle, meaning you can't reproduce the color. And if we look at like a blue on the lower left-hand corner, the blue on the lower left-hand corner is a blue like reflex blue, which is like 18 delta E out of gamut of Grackle, which 18 is a huge perceptible difference. And in most cases, unacceptable for almost everyone. If they're expecting something like a reflex blue and you get the blue that you would print on a Grackle print, it's very far off. And that's just due to the limitations of CMYK inks, which are used to produce the Grackle gamut, as opposed to a custom spot color ink, such as the Pantone values that go above and beyond what you can do with CMYK. So it's important to understand the limitations of color and ink when we start talking about matching colors and trying to reproduce colors. So in summary, light greatly affects color. Ideally, you'll want a spectral definition of your colors to have them as a definition. C-Lab is still valuable for editing and correcting. Spectral prediction for spots, tints, and profiles is really the future. And as we get into definitions and vocabulary, before we get into the 5 C's, I like to emphasize device consistency, which is one level of color control, and it's all about precision and ensuring that the device is repeatable. Doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. Device consistency is all about repeatability and consistency. And when we're talking about G7 methodologies, G7 provides a shared visual appearance between any substrates that you can print on. But G7 methodology does not ensure a color match. It ensures a shared visual appearance. And we typically use, especially when we're doing conventional printing, either flexo or screen or offset, a delta E metric to ensure my primaries, my cyan, magenta, yellow, and black solids are within a given delta E of my reference condition, which I'm aiming for. So Grackle, if we're going for a coated paper, Crackle uncoated if we're printing on an uncoated paper. And this is all about device consistency. But when we talk about device matching, meaning making two prints match one another, this is where color accuracy comes in. Color accuracy is how close is the print to Grackle. How many of you have ever had multiple prints that pass G7 compliance, but when you look at them, they're very different? Should be everybody. And then you're questioning, well, which one's right? Well, related to G7, if they're both passing G7, they're both right. Well, which one's more right? Well, if we're trying to aim for Grackle, then how do we quantify how close each print is to Grackle? And this is where we use a metric that, again, we'll learn more about next session, called your E factor, which is the 95th percentile delta E of how close is the print matching to a given reference. So using the targets down below, think of the bullseye as Grackle. And on the left side, we have a printer that's very consistent, but not necessarily accurate. So if we're just, let's say, calibrating my printer, I would get something like the dart target on the left. But in the middle, if I'm doing some G7 curves, I can get a higher level of accuracy. But if I'm not calibrating my printer, I'm not necessarily getting the consistency. So I've got high accuracy and low precision. And then on the right is a scenario where I've got both a very high level of color accuracy and a very high level of color precision. And if you're going to use the 5 C's of color management, you will get the diagram on the right. You can't shortchange any of the C's. You need all 5 C's if you want both high precision and high accuracy. And that's what we're going to be talking about over the next couple months with this series of seminars. So when we talk about the 5 C's, the first C is all about capturing the data. When we talk about capturing the data, we're capturing the data related to the instrument first and foremost, because if your instrument is not measuring accurately or to your expectations, why are you even using an instrument? There's no reason to use an instrument if the instrument isn't to your level of expectations for a color match. Then we go to the printer. And of course, this is where the money hits the road in terms of you need color accuracy in terms of meeting customers' expectations. So how do you know if the print is accurate? And of course, as we shared earlier, lighting is critical. So ideally, you should know that the lighting that you're using to illuminate the print is correct as well. And this can also be captured and quantified to know whether or not the light is right, the instrument is right, and the printer is right. And when I say right, I mean to your expectations of a color match. So that's the first C. Today we'll primarily be talking about instrument and printer. Then we've got the other 4 C's that I've kind of alluded to in my last couple of slides. We've got calibration, which helps make a device consistent to itself and over time. We've got characterization, which has to do with creating an ICC profile that defines the gamut of the device. And it, if you will, understands the color language that each printer speaks, because each printer on each substrate speaks a different language, and the characterization defines what that language is. And then we need the ability to convert the color. So since one of my printers might speak Spanish and one speaks Swahili, I need the ability to convert my color so when it goes to the printer that speaks Spanish, that it matches the printer that's speaking Swahili. And we do this through color conversion. And the color conversion can take place in different locations in the workflow, such as on the RIP or the DFE or a color server or in Photoshop, depending upon your needs and requirements. And we'll take sessions over the next, like I said, the next few months to cover each of these C's. Now, the conformance C is the ability to determine whether or not what you're capturing data for is meeting your expectations. And conformance tells us whether or not the instrument, the print, the lighting is to your requirements. So we'll talk a bit about conformance today, because without conformance, you don't know whether or not the calibration is doing what you want to do. You don't know if the capture if the device that you're capturing data from is doing what you want to do. So conformance is a key aspect of all of these variables, and it's something that we've taken a great deal of effort to quantify and define, as you'll see as we start talking about the first C, which is the capture C in terms of the 5 C's. So again, it's all about collecting data, and there's numerous measurement devices on the market that measure color. They all measure color a little differently, some more differently than others. But how do you know this? How do you know this unless you actually capture the same data with different instruments to define what the difference is between the instruments? Because so oftentimes companies will mix and match instruments. They might use one instrument on the proofer, another instrument on the digital press, and yet another instrument on the offset press. And if the instruments do not align, then you've got a gap in terms of the difference between these instruments. And so, as you'll see in a second here, we can actually go in and quantify what the differences are within an instrument and between instruments. And when we are talking about selecting an instrument, there's a number of factors to consider. Are you just measuring a single color, where a point and click instrument like this NIX is great? Or are you measuring some fabric or even foil, where using a spherical instrument like this instrument will come into play? So for instance, if you're trying to print on a foil material, trying to measure this type of material with an I1 is not going to work. Same with some unique fabrics. And I've got some unique wallpaper samples here that trying to measure some of these, if you print on samples like this, see if I can show it in the light to get the texture. Kind of hard here, but these all have different textures, and trying to measure this with a 45-0 instrument is not going to work very well. So that's where a spherical instrument comes in. So these are all different factors that you need to consider when you're choosing an instrument to do your measurements. And you can also determine whether or not you're doing a spot measurement or a target measurement. This is another variable that you can look at. All the instruments that I'm showing above can do strips, measure control strips in a very quick way, which if you want to do things like calibration and conformance, you typically will want an instrument that can measure strips to know whether or not your printer is printing in a consistent way. Now, we're still in the capture part. We're going to be talking about instruments. So there's instruments on the market. See if I can dig one out here. This instrument here is called a Color Muse. This instrument is $50, okay? And I have people ask me all the time, is this instrument appropriate for measuring my color prints? And the question is, it depends upon your expectations. So we have quantified what the repeatability is of this instrument using our T42 target. So this T42 target is an ISO approved target, which is serialized, has a silver backing, so it's 100% opaque. And we measure, we throw away about 70% of our production runs. And it's referenced in the ISO 23031 2020 guide for assessing spectrophotometry for consistency over time. So if you have this target and you measure your instruments with this target over time, you can eliminate the need to send the instrument back to the factory in whatever period of time that the factory recommends, because you can prove to the ISO committee that your instrument is precise and consistent, and there's no reason to spend the money to send it back to the factory. Now, when we do the consistency of a color muse, you see the graph here on the screen. And ideally, perfect, the lines would be at the bottom of the graph. And you can see that gold line is not at the bottom of the graph. In fact, it goes over one delta E. And so essentially, we can quantify the precision of this instrument, and then we can interpret based on the precision of this instrument, is it appropriate for your workflow that you're trying to use it in? And in most cases, for traditional and conventional and professional print, this instrument is not appropriate. Now, let's look at another instrument. So here's an i1 Pro 1, which was released in the early 2000s. And you can see it's better than the color muse that I just showed. But it's not the greatest. But hey, at the time, it was a phenomenal instrument. Now, here is another instrument, which is an i1 Pro 2. And you can see the i1 Pro 2 got significantly better than the i1 Pro 1, over twice as precise as the i1 Pro 1. And we can quantify its value as well. Here's the i1 Pro 3. Again, a nice improvement. You see how the lines keep getting lower and lower. That means it's more repeatable and more consistent. And as we go in and we can look at an exact, and we can see that also is very good. So this is a great way to know whether or not our devices are capable of meeting my requirements in terms of printing and repeatability issues. Now, here's a real life scenario where for a year and a half, this i1 measured very precisely. And then all of a sudden, 1 month when the operator measured the T42 target, the instrument jumped dramatically. And we often see this when the device has been dropped, especially once too many times. So in this way, the instrument was perfectly acceptable until it was dropped. And then once it was dropped, the software would now tell you this instrument is not appropriate for measuring high quality work because it's not precise anymore. So this would be a time where you should send the instrument back to the factory. And being a case of an i1, X-Ray will send you back a refurbished i1 that meets their requirements, that you can then double check within our software called Instrument Inspector to ensure that the instrument is to your level of precision based on your workflow. Because different workflows have different levels of precision. I've got customers who do, let's say, label printing on Flexo, and they're very particular about their colors and their work, and will use an i1 and Instrument Inspector, especially an i1 Pro 1 or 2, and I'll share with them based on the numbers that you cannot use this instrument to assess a 2 delta E of a color match, which let's say you're trying to do with the label. You've got to have an instrument more precise than an i1 Pro 1 or 2, and this is why you would go to an i1 Pro 3 or potentially an exact to get that higher level of result. Now, that's talking about instruments. And oh, by the way, we can also compare instruments to one another. So we can see how close does my i1 Pro measure color versus my Exact, versus my Barbieri, versus my Teshcon. Manufacturers will say, oh yeah, they're all the same. Baloney, they're not the same. You really need to test them. You need to understand what the differences are before you start going out and mixing and matching instruments within your workflow, because otherwise you're asking for problems. And I know manufacturers don't like me saying that, but I've seen it so many times, and I can prove it with the numbers that it makes sense to check your instruments out using Instrument Inspector before you start mixing and matching different brands of instruments for your workflows, because you can cause yourself a headache where you're doing everything right in the workflow, but because the instruments do not agree to the level of tolerance that you require, that everything fails. And you're scratching your head going, why isn't this working? And it's something really simple, because manufacturers often say, oh yeah, the instrument differences are so close, it doesn't matter. And that's just not true in many cases. So with that, let's turn our attention to print. So when we're capturing the data from our printing devices, we typically use different types of color bars. So in the first case, with a proofer, we use a 12647-7 color bar. The Ideal Alliance Control Wedge is a great wedge to help us understand how the proofer is printing and whether or not it's consistent or precise and accurate to the given target that we're aiming for, such as grackle. Conventional press, we often use a color bar on the side of the press and measure it with an automated measurement device like an IntelliTrax or a Spectre Drive, or built-in devices from Heidelberg and KBA that allow you to export the data to a third-party application like ours to tell you whether or not the press is printing right. And then digital presses and other types of digital printers, large format printers. And I'm showing our CC84 target here. And this target is like a P2P. Unlike a P2P, it can be measured in a fraction of the time because it's 80% fewer patches. But like a P2P, we can iterate G7 curves from this target and create G7 curves to go into our workflow in a very fast and efficient way. So you can use any color bar you want, but here's kind of an assortment of color bars for certain printers that we like to use. And then once you measure this color bar, so this is real life data from a customer of ours. This is the information of how this printer is printed over time. That green line you see there is the expectation for a color match that this customer is requiring, and you can see it's a 3. And you can see that the each one of these dots represents different measurements. So there's over 220 measurements represented on this over 220 days. And this printer is a digital press, and it's incredible how consistent it is over that 220 days. It never failed. It was very consistent, which is really rare for printers. Oftentimes the press will, something will break on the press, something will wear out on the press will fail. You'll see it in the data, you'll be able to correct for it, and then get the printer back into line before you print a customer's job of, let's say, 1,000 prints that have to go in the trash because it's no good. Now let's show a different printing device. This is a sheet-fed offset printing device. And you can see right away the E factor of this press, that green line, is higher. It's a 5 versus a 3. So we're allowing for more latitude. And even at a 5, this press isn't necessarily good at staying under a 5 all the time. I would guess it's under these 210 measurements, it's under a 5, probably 60% of the time, which Okay, it is what it is. A lot has to do with how good the operator is running the press, how much they're paying attention to it, how good the feedback is they're getting from the data from the measurement device, from the press to direct them how to adjust their keys, how to do the balance. The blue line, for instance, if you look in this graph, the blue line is telling us what is the within sheet variation on each page. So you can see in the middle here, there's a number of cases where the blue line is very high. This tells us that the within sheet variation on that page was not very good. So the operator wasn't really paying attention that the colors on the one side of the page were matching the colors on the other side of the page. The gray line, by the way, is showing us the consistency of the paper. So we've actually had a lot of our customers in the last year call out their paper suppliers in that they're tracking on every measurement, they're tracking the precision and accuracy of their press, but they're also tracking variables like the paper. So if the paper starts moving around in terms of the color, especially if it starts jumping, the delta E starts going high, you know that the paper might not be meeting the manufacturer's specifications, and you're not having to measure a special piece of paper to know that. You know it because on every production color bar, you've got a paper white sample on here, and the ChromaChecker software is checking the paper at the same time it's checking the print. So if the paper starts failing, ChromaChecker can tell you, hey, the paper is 3 delta E off. Please check the paper. It looks like it could be wrong. And like I've said, I've had a number of customers go to their paper suppliers and say, hey, your paper is not meeting your specifications. And the paper supplier is like, oh, how do you know that? No one else has complained. And then they show them this graph and they show the paper variation. And all of my vendors have said either they've gotten money back from the vendors because they've been able to essentially hold them accountable for the fact that the paper is different, but also they've been able to fix the problem in that, wouldn't you know, the next week that paper problem went away. So once they know you're looking, they seem to fix it very quickly. So kind of in a application demonstration here, I want to show you how this works. So I'm not going to take the time to actually measure the T42 target, but the concept is you measure the target. And by the way, you can use this target with an IntelliTrax or Teshcon SpectraDens, as well as a Barbieri or a Nix or a Spectra One. It literally will work with virtually any measurement device. And you measure this target 3 times in a row, at least 3 times in a row. And then the ChromaChecker software builds a baseline of how this instrument measures color. And then over time, you can set a reminder to remind me every month or every week, if you want, to remeasure this target. So you remeasure this target with your instruments, let's say every month, and it checks back to the baseline to tell you what the accuracy is of how well this instrument is performing over time. And if the instrument has a real low straight line, then you can build an ISO report that meets the ISO 23031 spec to prove to the ISO 9000 committee that your instrument does not need to be sent back to the factory, and you get fully utilized time and effort with that instrument. Now, for the print, we can use any color bar, as I've mentioned, and we can put color bars onto live work so that you don't have to do dedicated press runs. This is a huge issue, in my opinion, related to G7. Is I've done G7 press runs thousands of times over the last 20 years. And it's such a waste, in my opinion, it's such a waste of time and money for the printer to do a dedicated press run. Because number one, the operator never runs the press as they run actual production work. And what you're trying to do is build a curve that represents actual production work. So we need to get the press operator to run the press to the right densities on actual production work and then build a curve based on actual production work that they can use in production. And down below, I actually took a screenshot of a customer of ours where they have a Heidelberg press, and the image control is reading the color bar on the bottom, but Heidelberg doesn't allow you to customize the color bar, so there's no gray finders in that Heidelberg color bar. Now, if you put an IntelliTrax on here, you would have them, but Heidelberg doesn't allow it. So that this vendor put our CC84 target, which is essentially this target I'm going to show you in printing, but in a single row, which can be read with a scanning device like a scanning exact. So this customer reads that long strip in the middle of these two pages with a scanning exact to see how their press is performing on this job. And they don't put this bar on every job. They do it on all the jobs that fit, and then they measure them when they can, and they keep a pulse on how that press is running. And from this bar, they can tweak their G7 curve to keep it in line versus doing a dedicated press run. In fact, you'll say, well, don't we need a P2P to send it into ID Alliance for our G7 qualification? No, you don't. You only need the G7 verifier. And if you look at this sheet on the right side, there's the G7 verifier with the ID Alliance QR code on here. So this is the sheet that they submit once a year to ID Alliance to prove that they are still printing G7 compliancy. And this is really important because a dedicated press run runs around $5,000. And at the profitability that printers are trying to deal with today, that's $5,000 that printers can't afford. So the more you can run the press in a conventional mode and not have to do a dedicated press run, the better. Now, if this press had an IntelliTrax or a SpectraDens, then it would allow us to put our CC84 color bar in line with the color bar, meaning incorporated into the color bar. So we have color bars that we built for IntelliTrax and SpectraDens, Spectra drives, that have solids in every ink zone and have the gray finders spread out throughout the color bar. And in this way, when the press operator does his normal scan with his IntelliTrax or SpectraDens, ChromaChecker collects the data, and over the course of 3 days and let's say 20 jobs, the operator can take that data and iterate the press curve, the plate curve, to keep that press printing into a G7 state. So it's 100 times more efficient than a dedicated press run, and it's much more relative. Now, let's show you how we can do this with a digital device. So I'm going to use this target. By the way, if you go to chromachecker.com/trial, it will, or click on the QR code, take a picture of the QR code, it'll bring you to this page on the website, and it will allow you to download this PDF file and print it on your different digital printers. And I'm going to use our software called ChromaChecker Capture to capture this data. And then ChromaChecker will tell me what the conformance, the 5th C is of this data in terms of how close this print is matching a given reference condition. And because it's a CC84 target, I can use ChromaChecker Capture to actually iterate my G7 curve. So let's show how to do this. So I'm going to skip out of my presentation, and I'm going to go into my capture software, and let's do this. I'm going to quit out of my capture software so you can see how it works. When you first load it up, as it loads up, it asks me which instrument I'm going to connect to, and we support about 10 different instruments, including the spherical spectro, and I'm going to connect to my instrument. And now it knows it's an I1, and it gives me a video of how to use the capture software with an I1. So even if you've never used an I1 before and never used the capture software, you can go through this video And it takes you through how to configure the instrument, how to set the color bar, how to actually measure
ISO specifications.
the color bar. It talks about using a white backer. We give you hints. Like, I don't know why X-Rite doesn't do this standard. You see on my I1, I have markers that I put in with a Sharpie on both sides of the I1, so that when I line it up on my target, I line that Sharpie up on the target, so I have enough white space on the side for my I1, which helps making measurements much easier. So as I put my target down, notice I do have my ISO white backer. This is a white backer that we manufacture at ChromaChecker. It's got ISO black backing on one side, white backing on the other side. It's made out of PVC plastic, so it's very easy to clean, keep nice and white and ISO spec. And as I put my guide down, I am going to take my instrument and start scanning the cyan patch first. You'll see there's a
Dave, we're still seeing the video. We're still seeing the video, not the scan. So
yeah, you're right, because I haven't logged in yet. So thank you for that. I have to log in first to get to my scan. So here you see I'm going to measure my CC84 target, and I'll do it for my Inca offset. So you see I have different presses on the left side here. So depending upon which printer printed the target, and by the way, we support barcode readers. So you can put a barcode as part of the color bar. So using a barcode reader in Capture, you can scan the barcode and it will know, oh, this came off of the KM1 press on coated paper, and jump you to that spot right away. So making it really easy for the operator. So at this point now, I'm putting my I1 down and I'm holding the button. I'm dragging from left to right my first row, and you'll see the row gets entered. Now I'm dragging right to left, so the opposite direction, the second row, and in it comes, and I move my guide down, and now I'm moving left to right on the third row. And now ChromaChecker is going to come up and it's going to tell me, hey, we're passing my compliance. I'm 3.6 E factor to grackle, so the bullseye's grackle. I'm 3.6 away, so I'm allowing myself 3.5. I am right on the edge. I am so close to passing. I'm just a little bit off. And over here, I can see that my blue overprint's a little bit off with the X here. The green and the red are right. My G7 is right. But if I wanted to, let's say my G7 was wrong. If I wanted to iterate my G7 curve, I can click on this G7 button here, and up comes my G7 curve inspector. And I can go ahead and say calculate, and ChromaChecker is now building a new G7 curve to even improve more on this. And by building a new G7 curve, you see there's some adjustment. If I go in and reprint this, I can probably get closer. I can get a lower E factor and closer to my G7 condition. So let's show a real example where I do this. So I'm going to take my new print out. I'm going to rescan it, and you'll see I'll have a lower E factor. So as I scan the first row, and by the way, there's over 12 different formats for workflows that ChromaChecker can export. When we're doing it for digital here, the trials that we have for you will save out an HP LUT. It'll save out a EFI VCC. It'll save out a Caldera CGATS file. So all different formats based on the workflow that you're running. And I think I grabbed the wrong print because this one's actually a 4. But here it shows you again how the device printed. And I can go into my timeline and I can see over time how my prints have printed. So this gives me a history of how it's printed. Now, the trial version that we're giving you guys to start capturing data and see how your printers are printing The trial version, when we go back into Capture, it's kind of a generic version of our software. But if you want to have us track your data for you, meaning if you're going to print multiple prints, what I would ask you to do is put your customer name in the job name area here. And in this way, we'll be able to sort it and work with you one-on-one to show you the results of your prints and even show you how the prints match to one another. So the concept here is I've got the print out of, let's say, Inca, and I've got a print out of my Indigo. They might both be 3.5 or 4 to Grackle, but how close are they to one another? That's one of the most important things, is how close are your prints to one another? So I'm going to go show you how we do this from the cloud. And here I'm in the cloud, and I'm in my print inspector. So when Capture is a client software. So when it measures the data, it automatically sends it up to the ChromaChecker cloud. And the ChromaChecker cloud is the central repository which collects all the data and builds reports to show you how you did and give it to customers to show that everything's printing right. And we can also compare printers to one another. So I can say, hey, how close is my Inca to my, let's say, my KM1 press? So I'm going to say, how close is my Inca to my KM1 press? And when I say compare, ChromaChecker shows me that my KM1 press was 2.6 to Grackle, the Inca was 3.9 to Grackle, and to one another, they're 3.9. So it's showing me the green bullseye is Grackle, the Inca is 3.9 off, the KM1 is 2.6 off, and the visual difference between one another is 3.9. So this is really helpful, that you can start understanding and giving your printers a numeric value of how close they are to your reference condition, and more importantly, how close they are to one another. Now, in this case, both these prints pass G7, but which one is more accurate to Grackle? The KM1 press, because it's a 2.6 E factor off, where the Inca is a 3.9. So maybe I need to build an ICC profile for the Inca to get it even closer. So you'll see on our prints here, you can label what you've done to the print. Did this print with an ICC profile? Was it done with just calibration? Was it done with just a G7 curve? And if you're doing this with an Indigo, it's quite interesting, because if you just print this out without G7, with Indigo defaults, we'll say, this will typically be about a 6.5 E factor to Grackle. Then if you use ChromaChecker to build a G7 curve, apply it to the workflow, it's probably going to be more like a 5 E factor to Grackle. So you'll have the print that's a 6, you'll have the one that's a 5, and then if you build an ICC profile, which by the way you can do with ChromaChecker Capture, just measuring a bigger target than the CC84, build a profile for the Indigo, put it in the Indigo workflow, reprint, you'll get that Indigo down to like a 2.8 E factor to Grackle. And so you can say, show people, hey, this is what I get natively, this is what I get with a G7 curve, this is what I get with an ICC profile, and you can see the improvement and the ability to match your printers across your entire environment like you've never been able to do before. So it's all about capturing your data, understanding where your printers are at. When we teach G7 expert training course, we teach that the first thing you need is a stable environment. You need to know that your printer is stable. And that's what collecting data over time helps you see. It helps you see how stable your printer is. So if I look at the Inca, remember the graph I showed earlier with the one press, the press was always below the green line. Now, I'm not picking on an Inca here. Some of these cases you can see here where the gray line goes way up, the operator chose the wrong paper. So it's not always a mechanical problem with the printer. It's oftentimes an operator problem by choosing the wrong paper. But each of these peaks shows you situations where the printer went out of spec. And if you would have run the job when it was out of spec, you would have lost money on that job because it wouldn't have been right and the customer probably would have rejected it. And so collecting the data is a key part of any type of color control system. As Katie said, if you don't measure, you can't manage. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions that people might have related to what we've covered. Anything else that people might want to see. The last slide that I have to go through is just a summary slide of what we covered. And again, it's all about capturing your data and verifying that what you're captured is meeting your expectations. The next session, we're going to talk about production standards and tolerances. And once you've collected the data from your device, based on how that device is performed, what should your tolerance be? I've got customers that are running at a 7 or 8 E factor all day long on their presses and they make money. I've got other customers that are running at a 3 E factor and make money. Now, running at a 3 E factor takes a lot more time and effort than running at a 7. So hopefully the people running at a 3 are making more money on their jobs than the people running at a 7 because it took them more work to get to that 3. But they have higher end customers, more demanding, and they know they have to do that. Hence, they've implemented production standards, calibration schedules, because how often do you calibrate? Well, it depends upon your tolerance. Characterization, how often do you reprofile? You always hear about profiles going bad. How often should you reprofile? Well, it depends upon your production standard. And that's what you start learning as you collect the data, learn what the idiosyncrasies are for your device, optimize your conversions for both spot colors and process colors, and all the time, knowing, like what we just did here with ChromaChecker, knowing what the conformance is, knowing what your E factor is in terms of changing those variables. Did it improve your results or not improve the results? Because unless you know if your results are getting better or not, it's all luck. As St. Patty's Day coming up will tell you, it's all luck of the Irish in terms of crossing your fingers and hoping the color is going to be right.
So with 5 minutes left, I sorry to interrupt you, Dave, but I just wanted to allow a couple minutes for people to think about what they've heard today. Think about what you'd like to hear on top of this. And if you would please go to the chat box. The chat window has a link. You can right now, please click on that link, fill in that questionnaire for us. We need your feedback. We want to know if we are hitting the sweet spot with this information. So please let us know what you want to hear. We know that next month on April 11th, that will be the second Tuesday of the month, we will continue our demystification process of color quality control. So please fill that out, give us more feedback. And then right now, think of any questions that you might have for us while we have a few minutes left in this session. And remember, you're muted, so please unmute and let's chat.
I have a quick question.
All right.
I'm Michelle Van Heel from Carlson Print Group. So one great feedback is I've been monitoring my proofers for quite a while and just rolling out to my digital presses. And I never knew working with other color managers throughout time, one person said, oh, we need to calibrate every day. One person said once a month. So I was always curious how you really know, because my ILS 30 is still passing. So I re-verify everything through ChromaChecker, and 2 cycles now, it's been exactly, because how many proofs we run a month is different, it's between 992 to 1,000 proofs. I start to fall out of that tolerance that I set. And so now I know, I just watch that number of proofs, and that's when I go in and I recalibrate, and it drops right back down. It's almost literal to the number of proof that it just pops up. It's crazy. So my question is there's so many choices for, what I want to measure that tolerance to. And, they're all over the place. And what I thought was the target that I wanted to measure to everything, since we print on all different kinds of stocks, how do you know what to, set your target space to, that you want to say, I want to pass this every time, if you're running everything, right? I mean, if you're running plastic, paper, uncoated, coated, like you're all over, how do you really kind of set that, not just to get the pass, but I guess to, I don't know. I have an uncoated and a coated curve for my proofers now, but maybe I need to expand that. I guess I'm not sure.
Well, I think I understand your question. That's a great question. And by the way, great application of how often to recalibrate, right?
Yeah.
You've got the data, you've collected the data,
Yeah.
and it's so powerful to know
How
that.
would you know without the data? How would you know?
You wouldn't. You wouldn't know, because my ILS 30 still keeps passing, but it's fallen. You could see when it falls out. You can watch those numbers, they grow, but it's not like all the data I got out of there. It was stunning to me, just stunning.
You have to capture the data. That's the first
Super
of
cool.
5, for sure.
So now your question is more related to, okay, what should your reference be? Meaning,
Yes.
what
Yep.
should I aim for? Because I've got 10 different substrates that I'm printing on, and I have 2 references, coded and uncoated.
Yep.
And my references fall outside that, because I can try to aim for my coated, but if I'm running on a BOP material, it's never going to pass.
Right.
Acceptable.
Yep.
So the answer is that you ideally print a target like this CC84
Yep.
on all your different substrates that you print on.
Yep.
And then I'm going to show you a real scenario here using the software. I'm going to come in here and just quickly build a duplicate track that we're going to use for testing. So I'm just going to say testing. And the concept is you print your target on all of these different materials, okay?
Yep.
And then what we're going to do is measure them all and import them. And so I'm kind of working off the fly here. So I'm going to go into some data that I got from a customer of ours, who was a large format customer, and they print on everything. And actually they print on a bunch of different materials as well. So here we have like 20 different printers on these happen to all be on the same substrate. Because his question was, do I need one profile for my 10 Rolands, or can I just do one profile?
Oh, yeah.
So same concept, right?
Yep.
So I imported all this data from all the different printers. I'm going to select all of them, and then I'm going to go into what we call our print condition qualifier. And at my print condition qualifier, I set what my E-factor threshold is. So I'll say it's 3. So which of these printers are within a 3 of one another? And when I say confirm, it shows me out of the 24 printers, 11 of them are within 3. They group into 11 groups. And as we go here, if you look at like the Roland, here's the Roland, they're in 2 groups. And we can look further and see that if we put 3.2 here on the tolerance and recalculate, all my roll-ins fall into one group. So I only need one profile to represent all my roll-ins.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Is that cool?
Yeah, that's way cool. That'll help me determine, should I really create that extra profile, or, you know, how different are they, so I can get more passing without rerunning and changing it all the time.
Exactly right. And the one at the top, the roll-in 10, is the one most like the others. So that's the only one you have to profile. In the same way, if this were 30 different substrates, the substrate at the top of the group is the one profile, and then all the other substrates can piggyback off that one substrate.
So cool.
Thank you. These guys, we realized here, he didn't even realize his HP latex were kind of, you see, he has 5 of them. 3 of them are really close to one another, but one is out in left field and one is out in right field. And so this was able to share with him that, oh, I've got to look at my color management on this 572 and this 533 to figure out why they're so much different from all the rest of these. And so this is a very helpful tool to help figure out which substrates you need to profile, what reference conditions you need, and more. It's really helpful. So great question. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions right now? Dave, maybe we should put the QR code back up for capture. That would be good. And then I think the whole point in this is that, you know, when we talk about color quality control, the only way to it is through it. And there are 5 C's. You need to go through those 5 C's. And we can see today that capturing the data is the first C. Without measuring, you can't manage. So take a shot at this. We invite you to experience capturing some of your very own data. And then we hope to see all of you. Well, first of all, we hope to get your feedback. So please go to the chat box, chat window, and go to that link for us. And then we hope to see all of you. Mark your calendar for April 11th. That'll be the 2nd Tuesday of the next month. And we hope to see you back for another C in the demystification of color control. So if there are no other questions, we thank you again for your time, and we hope to see you next month or talk to you between now and then.
Yeah,
Thanks.
if there's any questions going through this procedure to baseline your devices in terms of any instructions you don't understand, feel free to reach out to either Katie or myself.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.